Welcome back and thank you for staying with Morning Express. Good morning if you're just joining us. We continue reviewing the latest in the local dailies, just highlighting what has been covered in the Standard and the Daily Nation as well, extensively, mind you. Joining us as well, Member of Parliament for Nambale constituency, Sako Bunyasi. Many thanks for your time and good morning.
Good morning, Jesse.
Thank you for making time. Let's continue with what we had just started earlier on with Agri Chabeda, who's a governance expert. I would like to take a look at what has been highlighted on page 8 of the Standard. It's an explainer how counties have ranked in spending project billions. Now, data shows that over the last 2 full financial years, Narok, Mandera and Muranga counties spent the most on growth projects. This even as we appreciate the fact that legally county governments are required to spend at least a maximum of 35% of their revenue on recurrent expenses, that is salaries and administrative costs. Best performers are there. The not so best performers are also highlighted. But I'd like us to begin in Nairobi, the capital, that has been covered extensively. Taking a look at what has been highlighted in the Standard, it mentions that at least the percentage of cash the capital city absorbed in the 12 months for projects that would generate cash was the lowest among the 47 counties. That's for the 12 months to June 2020. This coming from the capital city of Nairobi definitely shows that not too much emphasis was put into capital generating projects, and also the county was struggling to generate its or collect as well its own revenue. Agri, I'd like to begin on this particular point. What do you make of the state of affairs in Nairobi, as has been highlighted right here?
Yeah, I mean, I think even as these counties overall ask for more cash from the government, we know that, for example, in the BBI, they want to increase the minimum amount of cash they get from 15 to 35%. But as you can see here, that even the money that they're getting is not being spent. There are various reasons why this happens. One of them is usually you don't have the capacity to spend it in terms of administrative capacity or the plans. Another one is just inefficiency, where you plan to do things and you don't do them. But I think more worryingly is when I see this figure of Nairobi at, for development absorption at 56.7%, it's a bit misleading, because if you looked at how the total revenue that Nairobi has and how much they spend on development, it translates to 8.5%. And that's a very, very low figure for funds that are meant to actually help develop the city. There must be another way found at which we make sure that we get more efficient on our administration, and we then are able to push more funds for development, and then ensure that, in fact, that we do have the capacity to actually carry out and execute those development projects, so that the cash doesn't just stay unused.
Okay, that's really proper. In terms of development, it's also proper to note that according to the Treasury, the counties have set aside the required 30% of revenue for development. That's the required amount, but they have not actually been spending it. It's worrying, Sakwa Bunyasi, especially since development is quite key in progress in terms of the economic growth in this particular counties. Before we talk about more funds going to counties, what do you make of the funds and how they're being absorbed right now?
On it. For one, the way the funds are disbursed is not predictable. Counties don't know how much will be disbursed when their next disbursement comes. That kind of ad hocism is not helpful for planning. That's one. Two, I think we should also highlight that there was over 100 billion that had not even been transferred to counties by the end of the financial year. So even the central government has to blame it in this so-called measure of absorptive capacity. And thirdly, of course, counties may also include, as my colleague has said, the reasons he has pointed out, including inefficiency. I do not think there is any county in this country which is unable to use those funds. And remember, for counties, you start off with the health expenditure that's easily about, in my county, in Busia and many other counties, is at least 45% of the total expenditure. And most of it is recurrent, which is needed. Recurrent expenditure is a good thing because you have to pay for your nursery school teachers, you have to pay for healthcare workers, and you have to maintain your roads and so on. So it's not necessarily bad. We have to look clearly at what it is that's probably not useful. So these unpredictable disbursement profiles the central government uses because of their own difficulties with the revenue shortfalls need to be put into account. Lastly, Jesse,
yes,
we need to compare this with the absorptive capacity of the national government. Let's see how they have done it. Then you'll get a clear picture whether the problem is systemic or whether the problem is in a specific county. Then, of course, it is in all of these places. But if we are thinking about doing it in a positive way toward getting a solution, then we have to look at what the overall situation looks like and how the counties vary as counties and how between the counties there are those variations. Obviously, there are going to be. But it's not a good story. Overall, it's a pretty sad story that we are not taking advantage of the legal framework, financial framework that we have got now. And I was listening in, but I wasn't able to comment on the issue of the NHIF. So I just want to steal half a minute on that.
All right, no problem.
And say it's a very sad story. NHIF itself has been dysfunctional for a long time. You remember the scandals that there was about 3 years ago, very huge scandals, which really meant that they were not using this money the way they should use it. And now, when we get all these changes in administrative procedures, in the middle of, for example, now we have a pandemic, or when patients are already in hospital. I have a patient I know in my constituency who is in and has medications that require 6,000 shillings a day. NHIF says, oh, sorry, we shall only pay for your bed. And this poor person has to find 6,000 shillings a day and they need medication for 15 days. They have been abandoned. I think there's something happening with NHIF, among all other things, that's probably criminal, that they do not have the funds. I think we need to see a forensic audit done there. It has been bad enough as it was a while ago. I do not think it's been cured. So and that's a parastatal. If that had been happening by the collective of private insurance companies, would have been saying they should get out of this market. But here is one of our own parastatal, not doing a good job. Extremely sad.
Well, it truly is a grim state of affairs, especially for the families that are affected. But also back to what we were talking about, the counties. It's proper, you noted about the recurrent expenditure and how proper it is in terms of payment. But Sakwa, even if we note Nairobi right here has an average of 56.5% of the city's funds going towards wages. That's more than half of the revenue on salaries in a couple of financial years. Isn't this bad news, especially since it's more than half going towards recurrent expenditure?
No, you see, remember that, we generally tend to generalize about the non-desirability of recurrent expenditure exceeding a certain amount. But in cities like Nairobi, apart from the education and healthcare services, there are social services. Most cities around the world, and Nairobi used to be in that league, have to subsidize housing, for example. You have to provide slum services, including water supply, as you know, sanitation, the rest of it. Those are extremely essential expenditures. Sure enough, Nairobi can do more road construction. Nairobi can do more housing development, when a lot of the people have great difficulty. Nairobi can invest more in transport and so on, for example. So those are important. But I think the point I'm making is the popular media that tends to highlight it, the negative sense. You'd almost think that if you had only 20% recurrent and 80% development, you'd be doing the right thing. The so-called development would not move without a great increase in this recurrent. And the services that you already established would not run without your maintaining this recurrent expenditure. Now, the other thing, just that is also not clear, I have not got it from looking at the papers, is that we really do not know if they are accounting for all of the revenue they are raising, or whether something is happening outside of the formal systems, the IFMIS and so on. Those are still areas of further refinement that haven't come out very clearly for counties, but also as a person who sits on committees that looks into this, there are many national departments that operate outside IFMIS. Some of the expenditure outside of the IFMIS. So you never get a clear picture on this. We need to handle it with an element of caution.
Oh, quite so, even as we tread on these waters. Agri, let's talk about the low absorption rates, even as you add on what we've just talked about. I mean, because this is truly worrying. Perhaps we can blame it on some of the issues that you've just highlighted. But going forward, in the midst of delays of disbursement of monies from the Treasury, how best can the counties manage, at least to improve some of the statistics we're seeing right here?
I think if payments are part of the problem, then it becomes a very difficult thing to manage. And payments can be managed if there is predictability on as to when one will get paid. So if the government is part of the problem, and indeed it is, then the government needs to be a bit more transparent in the way it disburses funds. And by transparency, I mean it needs to sit with the counties and agree on payment plans and stick to them. That way, it becomes easier for the county governments to sit and plan also how they will execute. It becomes easier for them to deal with how they will procure. It becomes easier to deal with any debts they have, because then the service providers also have some confidence that if they do business with the county, this is what will happen and when. In the absence of that, I think the blame game will continue, and the truth will always lie somewhere in between those cracks.
Okay, but generating own revenue is also quite proper going forward. Taking a look at some of the best and worst, Taita Taveta rated quite highly at 119.8% in terms of generating their own revenue. Lowly ranked Garissa at around 58.3%, Nairobi following at around 58.2%. How important is generating your own revenue as a county, because bearing in mind with the delays in terms of funds, with the problems in terms of ensuring that money is truly used in proper ways, generating your own revenue might be quite critical in running these devolved functions. Agri, what's your take on this?
I think that's generating their own revenue is everything.
Yeah.
Once these counties can be able to wean themselves from dependency on the central government, then they'll be able to plan and do a lot better. Over the weekend, I was driving through Gilgil, and I was just looking at the town and the way the pavements are so undone. And in my mind, I was wondering, I know it is not typical. There are a lot of towns which are very, very similar to Gilgil. I just happened to have gone through Gilgil. Yeah. And you see that perhaps there isn't a direct correlation between the spending that the county government may do by, for example, cleaning up the pavements and putting some hard surface and getting the drainages done, and revenue from the people who are probably doing business on the other side. I think if there was a direct correlation in terms of their ability to collect taxes from these people as opposed to the government, and then the government dishing out the funds, it will definitely improve the way they manage themselves. All right.
Sakwa Bunyasi, counter checks and balances are quite important as we finalize on this particular topic on the counties, because I definitely like your input on a story that has been highlighted on page 14 of the Daily Nation around the sugar millers who are protesting on cheap imports. Give us your take on the counties so far. With this showing how counties are spending, how best would we get to incorporate, 30%? There's talk of that, 35% in the BBI. Going forward, more money definitely means more allocations, more resources. What do you make of the clamor for more resources to the counties?
I think, I personally believe that, of course, over time, resources that go to counties ought to increase, because remember, that's where the population lies. The counties are the ones looking after the 50 million people of this country in one way or another. So it's a very important expenditure. It's not as if it's an aside. It should be a core of our overall expenditure, because they provide essential services. However, the degree to which they'll use this money will depend, as we said, and that my colleague has said, Chabeda said, on their preparedness. In terms of clear plans against which you can do procurement once the resources are in. In accordance with the Public Finance Management Act, you cannot initiate procurement process until you have the money, literally. You can't say, Treasury has it, I'm going, unless it's already put into your account. And so if it's not, then you halt the processes and so on. So I hope that also the center will be more predictive in how they will disburse the funds. And they say, of course, they can't do that because their own collections are not as predictable, but there must be a formula, and maybe sitting down and thinking through it would also help. The Treasury has to take this as their core, as their core mandate to support the counties to get monies on a daily basis, on a regular basis. I can assure you that doesn't always come through. It may be there, but it doesn't always come through like that. So getting to that 35%, I would have thought, as a matter of fact, although my views, I think, may be not outlandish in a sense, that if you're aiming to hit 35%, we should have been progressively growing it towards 35%. It won't be a magic thing to wake up one morning and say, oops, you've got 35% resources here, if the planning is not adequate. That doesn't just happen for counties, it happens for any institution that is not clear ready. Now, talk about the counties, I think it's desirable to move towards a higher allocation, a higher minimum allocation. But let's also be realistic. These are public funds. They should, perhaps counties should be absorbing it on the basis of how they're using their funds. You remember in the formula that was used before, the allocation to counties, financial responsibility, I think it was given some other title, I may not be getting it completely right, how responsibly the county is in terms of absorbing and accounting for those funds, maybe showing that most of the funds are going to proper use and not being wasted, would earn them a premium. Now maybe we should say, would earn them an increased allocation towards 35% or even 35% for some. But if clearly they are not getting there, if clearly they are stuck at the base, don't give them 35%, because up to 15% is already a problem. But remember, up to 50% is just a theoretical figure, because they don't get full 15, they get parts of it.
True.
And then they fill up the following year. But let's hope that that will be fixed. I think that counties can move in a way that's depending on the efficiency with which they absorb the funds. Their funds will always remain allocable to them, but that what they actually get released must be related to how they're using the monies that they are receiving. And that should not be used to punish. It should be a purely technical, financial, and managerial assessment of how the programs in that county, beyond the current ones, are being planned and executed.
All right. Let's cross over to agriculture right now. Sakwa Bunyasi, I'll start with you. It's highlighted on page 14. We were able to discuss it in brief with Agri Chabeda right here. In terms of the sugar millers who are protesting the cheap imports, the entry of duty-free sugar into the country over the last month has led to a glut in the local market, threatening to bring to the knees the operations of the struggling public millers. Ever so often do we see such highlighted in the dailies. There's talk about the price of sugar. The 50-kilogram bag has gone down. Well, first of all, where do you think the problem lies in order to actually solve this in totality, if possible?
The foremost lies in bad governance. It lies in a very corrupt system that we've got. I come from a border county. And the amount of sugar that seems to come in from Uganda, it passes non-formal roads. but everybody knows they are carrying sugar. The police know, and in fact, we talked about it the last weekend. We were in the county with the other leaders. The road barriers are removed. The truck stop somewhere, and the prop boxes pass at high speed, causing a lot of accident they have actually, to feed into this truck. Sometimes the trucks themselves pass through. That is a land border coming in, the sugar coming in from Uganda. Obviously, Uganda is not having surpluses. It probably went there in the first place from Mombasa, and is now re-entering. It's an open criminal secret. And I think it's that failure by the security forces, and also by, I would say, by government overall, to allow this to be happening, because people want to raise money in one way or another. I think is criminal and is hurting the sector. Two, the millers themselves may not be entirely innocent. You know, they're allowed to import sugar under certain rules. They are allowed not have an auditable evidence, yet they are also into the business of trading in sugar rather than hustling. Now, you see, many of them have stopped, those that are functioning have stopped providing farm-level services. They do a terribly small amount of that. So farmers are left to their own means and what they can do, because these companies can still get some money through trading in sugar, including illegal imports. I think something that is entirely, the laws are adequate. It's just that there is impunity the way we are doing things. I think we have not, as a country, we haven't firmly made it intolerable to break the law. I think people still know they can get away with it, with the slap on the hand, or not at all, or perhaps with nothing said. Even if people know, people turn away their eyes, the security agencies and so on. I think it's just completely unacceptable.
Well, it seems to be revolving around duty-free sugar, which is imported at the expense of the ailing industry. Agri, the ministry has definitely come under fire over and over again for failing to rein in on the dumping of sugar in the local market. That definitely has an effect on the factories and the stakeholders as well. How best can we put an end in finality? Because we've just highlighted the true issue on the ground. It's an open secret, as he's mentioned.
I think what needs to be done is very well known. We need to make our sugar more efficient. We need to pay our farmers what they are worth, and we need to pay them on time. We need to get more transparent with this business of importing sugar, which comes around and which is used as a cover by corrupt people to get in duty-free sugar and raise huge sums of money. And unfortunately, the politicians, some of the politicians are involved by trying to raise funds for us, and you'll see more of this as we approach the election time. But the result is devastating to the economy, especially of Western Kenya, because the sugar industries really are the only major industries there. And you know, once you have a major industry, it has a big trickle-down effect in terms of service providers and other little businesses that then thrive around it. And when it shakes, it really shakes the people to the core, to the fact that you find that they can no longer afford to take their kids to school, they can no longer afford to buy medicine and stuff like that. So I think we should just do what we've always said. All these papers, I'm not an agricultural expert, but I've read some of these papers on what needs to be done. It just does not get done.
Okay, then now let's talk about the COMESA safeguard in terms of the sugar safeguard. What do you make of this, Sakwa Bunyasi? There's been a lot of talk about it in terms of COMESA quota for 2020 being exhausted. It was extended for another 2 more years. Talk to us about it.
That has been the story for a long time. I think perhaps since as far back as 2008, 2011, Kenya has always had has always been favored in a way, within the rules, of course, that the safeguards have been extended and extended and extended. The extension was to enable the government to fix its own internal sector, to fix the agricultural chain, the transport chain, the marketing chain, to be able to gain some efficiencies so that they are able to compete without all this protection that are being provided. But what has happened, as is classically known in many ways, that once you provide these subsidies and these support mechanisms, it's difficult to remove them because people get hooked onto them. They get ways and means in which they can be able to keep them in place. Kenya has not made the improvements that were expected. As a matter of fact, as you know, some of the factories have closed, so the internal market is fragile, and there's an outcry by farmers, and they need support, an outcry by citizens about the failure in the loss of jobs, factories are collapsing. I think it's a sad story. As you know, a lot of it has been around misgovernance. For years has been largely because of unbridled corruption, although it was a private sector company. And even prosecuting and processing those cases has been, system is acting as if it's unable to do it. There may be other reasons other than inability to do it. It may be unwillingness to do it. So Jesse, we are in a situation in which, yes, the safeguards have been helpful. They have been extended. And obviously, Kenya must be exceeding now what it needs to have produced locally, because they can't, because the industry is in its needs. So they have to depend a lot more to fill the gap on increased imports beyond the quota that they had been given. If our industry had been working well, then we could be able to manage at the margin like it used to be before. We used to consume maybe 800,000 at one time, near 1 million. And a lot of that was being supplied, 60% or so is coming in from local factories. And the difference of about 3, sometimes 400 tons would come from will come within the rules of commercial safeguards. But I think all that has now, is no longer really value. We are producing very little domestic sugar.
Right.
So essentially, we rely more on those imports, which are way beyond the quotas we've been given. So I think that we have been sitting on our heads on this one. We really must take this sector very, very seriously to grow it, because there is agronomic potential and there is also commercial potential. They talk about productivity levels being less than in irrigated areas. The smaller farmers do not face the kind of overhead costs that large-scale farmers do. They're able to produce efficiently. But the support systems have just collapsed.
Well, what's the need of the support systems that far? But anyway, that's the latest in terms of the agriculture, touching on the sugar sector. Make sure you're informed. It has been highlighted extensively in the dailies, but we also did touch on the latest in terms of education with Agri Chabeda earlier on, and I'd still like to rebound back to that, as it has been highlighted extensively on the front page of both the Standard and the Daily Nation. It's alarm as the Standard 8 candidates have failed the school-based exams, even as experts agree, raising questions around the rationale for releasing these results just a couple of weeks to the tests. Do you question this at any point?
Yes, I think it's unfortunate that they've released them at this time.
Yeah.
It's almost like they are telling us we are heading downhill, but here is a taste of what you're going to see down. But it's as I said earlier, this is not surprising, these figures. It is surprising that they've been released particularly at this time, considering KPSE is about to, KPCE.
KCPE.
Is about to take place. I think it is very demoralizing to parents to see that things are in a very grim state, and yet there is nothing they can do because there isn't much time between now and the exams.
Okay, it was meant for feedback earlier on. Sakwa Bunyasi, even as they hinted that as the students resume, there will be an assessment of sorts. With the results out, it's not too good. Nairobi topping, averaging, not averaging too good as per the dailies. What do you make of the months or the month ahead to the KCPE examination? It will be tough in terms of not just the stakeholders, but the students as well.
Okay, thanks, Jesse. Let me start with the system itself. I think that, or I know that with the corona, the long absence at home may be blamed because students hadn't been in to cover their syllabi in a way that they probably would have all of the education. But remember, what has bedeviled our system for a long time is that the competency levels, for example, if a kid is in class 5 or class 6, is their reading ability that of what is estimated to be the reading ability at class 6, or is their numeracy that of that grade? And I think consistently they were at much lower levels. The reading abilities, this has been found by cross-sectional studies in Kenya, that they have always been much behind. Kids in class 4, the reading ability is probably that of a second grader or something like that, in accordance with the expectations of the system itself. So I think that the capacity of the system to impact the level of competency at the various stages is poor. And that must go back to education. Education, we should be hearing more scientifically based pronouncements rather than edicts and decrees and that kind of thing that you hear a lot of, and not confronting the real issues and looking to blame the parents, to blame so and so and so on. So I think that's unfortunate. But where we are now, results ought to be released whenever they are done. But what will happen is that when the exam comes along, the KCPE, which will come in a couple of months, I think these should be exams that are marked on the curve, that are marked relative to the students and relative to the higher ones, the better ones. The issue of your pass and fail, when the system itself should be put to that test, system itself should be whether it's a passing system or a failing system.
Right.
As it is, it's a failing system. So you can't then put it on the children. I think to be probably unfair, we should accept that this year's grade 8, their competence levels will be lower, and now the second school will have to pick up a bit and bring them up to speed. But this pass or fail thing, only for the students, when the administrators ought to be in fact subject to similar, not exam, but similar test, pass or fail, I would give them a big fail in terms of educational administrators, public education administrators. So you can't put that failure of competence from the administrators entirely on the children.
Well, it's all round. I think everyone definitely has their weight to push, and we'll definitely continue monitoring the state of affairs, not just in the education sector, but other areas as well. Many thanks, Bunyasi Sako, a Member of Parliament, Nambale constituency, Agri Chabeda also joining us in studio, governance expert. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time as we got to look at what has been highlighted in the dailies. Make sure you grab yourself a copy to be adequately informed. We just highlighted some of the stories. We take a short break right now. As mentioned earlier, it's all about health. You want to find out more? Stay with us.